Now for this week's main program, here is VP of Programs, Beth Knox, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Jeff. And I just want to add my congratulations to you on your last day. It's been a pleasure serving with you this past year, and I know that you will enjoy some relaxed time going forward without the weekly meetings of preparation. So thank you for all of that you've done. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker. Jen Mueller is a 20-year sports broadcasting veteran and currently serves as the Seattle Seahawks sideline radio reporter. She's also an Emmy Award-winning producer and part of the Seattle Mariners television broadcast team on Root Sports. In addition to her work on the sidelines, Jen launched Talk Sporty to Me in 2009. She provides a unique twist on business communication based on her time in the locker rooms and expertise in one-on-one conversations. Jen is the author of 3 books and recently launched an on-demand video series called Asking Better Questions. Now, I can say that I've been on the receiving end of many of Jen's sessions and workshops, and she truly is an amazing presenter of leadership skills. So it is really my pleasure to introduce my friend, Jen Mueller. Jen, take it away.
Thanks so much, Beth. It is such an honor to be with this group. And I guess we should start off by saying this. Today's presentation is the focus talking about talking, which after that introduction from Beth, you can see why I would be so focused on talking. But there's a little bit of a twist to how we're going to do this today. It is absolutely going to come back around to leadership skills. And what we will have by the time we finish our time together are some clear-cut conversation strategies that you can start using right now to improve communication skills. And yes, I talk for a living, and you might assume that I talk a lot in my job on TV and radio. And I probably assumed that that's what was going to happen when I chose broadcasting as my college degree. But it did not take very long of being in sports broadcasting before I realized we actually have a lot of time constraints in TV and radio. In fact, most of the content that I deliver happens 15 to 20 seconds at a time. And I have to find a way to make that count. And being in a locker room full of guys does not mean that anybody is going to talk to me, because those athletes that I've spent 20 years getting to know, they have really busy schedules, much busier than you think. They sit in a ton of meetings, and it's not like they're going to tell Pete Carroll, yeah, let me just push this team meeting back 5 minutes so that I can talk to the media, right? Everything is very scheduled, and I've got to have a chance to build relationships, but our conversations are often very short. Sometimes they are one word, sometimes they are one sentence, but it is all about finding ways to build relationships. In addition, my job as somebody that is front-facing, that is on camera and on radio, is never actually about me, which surprises a lot of college students who want to know what it's like to be on TV. And what I tell them is, it is always about being in service to others. And I've got lots of different people that I'm in service to when I'm on TV. I'm in service to my television audience because I'm bringing them information. I'm in service to the athlete that I'm interviewing because the questions that I ask allow him or her to share their story in a very unique way. When I am talking to my editor at the TV station, the one who makes TV magic happen, the way I talk to him and the details that I give him make it easier for him to do his job. So I am in service to the people that I work with. And all of that comes through in the way that I talk to people and the intentionality that I bring to conversations. Now, I realize that your workplace smells a heck of a lot better than a football locker room after a game, and that is a very good thing. but you are encountering a lot of these same dynamics in your day-to-day work. You are talking to colleagues, to clients, to employees, to potential employees and prospects, and all of these types of conversations that require relationship building and being in service to others, because that's also what you are committed to do as Rotarians. They all have very similar threads that we should be able to see in all sorts of little interactions during the course of the day. So in our time together, here's what we're going to do. We are going to come up with a game plan that we can follow. There's going to be 3 conversation strategies that are going to allow you to connect with greater ease and communicate with more effectiveness. The strategies are also going to help you identify the missed opportunity in every single conversation. And if you get that one, that's the one that you really, really need to listen to. It will change how every conversation unfolds for you from now until you stop using that strategy. We will also take a look at a counterintuitive approach to stay in the loop, which is very important when we are experiencing transition. Just like right now with the board and how it's Jeff's last day, right? There's going to be some transition that takes place, but also as business owners and business leaders, what it looks like to be in a hybrid work environment and trying to stay up to speed on lots of different things. And lastly, our strategies will allow us to be more productive 15 seconds at a time. That's all it's going to take. As we get rolling here, let me see if I can gracefully share my screen, which is sometimes not the easiest thing for me to do, which drives my tech husband kind of crazy. But I think I've mostly managed to do this. So let's get to the point where you can see our starting point for this. The key to all of these things, to making sure that we can be productive in 15 seconds and identifying the missed opportunity, is first of all, understanding what it is that you are trying to accomplish in a conversation. That's where our intentionality really comes in key. Because if you don't know what it is that you want to accomplish, you cannot be surprised when nothing happens. And I started thinking about this last week as I was reading an article on why sports conversations should be banned in workplaces. Now, you can imagine that as a sports broadcaster, of course, it kind of rankled me a little bit, but also part of my business model for Talk Sporty to me is helping business professionals and business owners use sports conversations to their advantage. And the more I read through this article, the more I realized that the folks trying to ban sports in this instance couldn't define the objective of their conversations. And if you can't figure out what you're trying to get out of it, what you want to accomplish, what you need the other person to do as a result, you're probably not going to be able to guide it as successfully as you think or as you hope. We walk into conversations all the time thinking that we are prepared, but failing to see both sides of the conversation. We don't give enough thought to how somebody else is hearing this message. We think about the message we need to communicate, and that's important. But as a leader, if we are taking a big picture view and we are understanding all the different people that are involved and all the different decisions and the cascading effect of those decisions, what we should be doing is playing out this conversation all the way through on both sides so that we don't keep people in the dark and so that we make it easy for people to understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing. If we don't have an objective and think through this, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to come up with the exact right thing to say in that moment, when also we're trying to remember the real information and we're trying to connect and we're trying to pay attention to what we're saying and we're trying to be present. There's a lot of things that are happening. And we put just as much pressure on the people that we're talking to fill in the blanks or to ask the questions that get the information that they need. Now, I realize that All of you are very skilled at communicating as business owners, as colleagues, and as friends. And most of the time, you could completely wing a conversation and it would work out just fine. But because I often only get 15 seconds to either make an impression, make an introduction, build a relationship, or deliver content, I'm not content to leave that up to chance. I'm going to be very strategic in the message that I communicate. I have to be crystal clear on that one. And I loved what Father Sundberg was saying about the gratitude that he was showing for Jeff, right? And I don't think, if I were to ask for a show of hands right now, and I ask, how many of you have a gratitude practice? Yes, there's a few. You either write down or you acknowledge daily, weekly, monthly. Yep. Okay, so I see a lot of hands going up. Now, when you have a gratitude practice, you know that you are looking for small ways to practice gratitude. It does not have to be the big moment. I want you to think about how grateful you are when you are in a conversation and it just flows. And it's so easy. And it could be with your best friend. It could be at a networking event. It could be between a few of you that are on the session today. But there's no awkward pauses. You're not stressed about what you should say next. You're not trying to figure out how to escape the conversation because you don't want to, because it feels good, right? You know what it takes to be that person? The one that people want to talk to, the one that people are grateful to talk to. It takes having a response to the question, how are you? So I'm going to have you do this in the chat. Here's what I would like. I'm going to open up this chat. I'm going to give you a minute, just a second. We get this question all the time. How are you, Jeff? How are you, Beth? How are you, Fiona? And we all have our standard go-to answer. And I want you all to type that standard go-to answer into the chat. And I want you to watch what happens. Don't overthink this. Like, literally tell me exactly what you would. Yep. Good, great, well, terrific, just fine, great. Awesome. Okay, so here's what I would like. Yep, great, fine. Okay, so do you see what's happening here? So everybody can see the chat, right? Okay, so here's what I would like. Could I get Ken Grant? I see you there, and I see you very attentive. Can you unmute yourself for me? Because we're gonna play this out, right?
Do it right now. Come on.
Right now. Here we go. Ken, how are you?
I'm great. And you, but I'm lying. So, but still, how are you?
I'm awesome.
Are you lying?
No, I'm not lying, but I just created a really awkward moment for us. Right? What are you going to say next? And what am I going to say? Actually, I'm going to ask you why you're lying. Also, why are you lying?
I don't know. I think people put up a front, and I think we get used to saying excellent, good, and great. And how are you?
I think you are exactly right. And it could have been a plant, but it was not. You can go ahead and mute. Thank you for being part of the demonstration today. How are you? Whether you say that you aren't doing well or that you are doing well, here's what I want you to think about. This is the moment to control what happens next in the conversation. It is the most pivotal moment in every conversation, and it is also the most overlooked. If you take nothing else from today, I want you to think about this. Your conversation starter is not the topic that comes next, right? It is not the business that you are trying to get to. It is not the questions about where they grew up and what they like and when you're going to get together for coffee. How are you? And your response directs the conversation where you want it to go. There is nothing that says you have to follow the script that says, I'm good. How are you? I'm good. And also I wouldn't, because that doesn't leave you a whole lot to go on. So your response, if we think about being very intentional here, your response should introduce a topic that you are interested in talking about, make the follow-up question obvious. So as business owners, you could talk about your employees. You could talk about the success of your business. You could talk about what's on the horizon. You could talk about a recent success or an accomplishment, something that you are proud about. And to the point that we were just making, you could also use this to tell people that you are struggling and that you need a little help, or that you could use 15 minutes just to talk through something because you are at your limit, your cup runneth over, and you just need somebody to give you perspective. This is the moment. As leaders, this is how you make yourself approachable to other people. It's easy for them to ask a question. So if my boss at work were to say, "How are you?" my response would be, "I'm awesome. You know those shows you assigned to me? I'm ahead of schedule on that." So now he could either choose to say, "Oh, that's great. How's it go?" Tell me a little bit more about what the shows are doing, how the approach is, when do you think it's going to be done? Or he can turn and walk away. But either way, I've used that time to deliver a very specific and intentional message. If a potential client asks me how I'm doing, I'm going to say, "I'm awesome. I've given 4 presentations in 2 days, and it feels really good to be back in front of an audience." You could choose to follow up with me or not, but how else was that potential client going to know to ask me about anything, right? This is your chance. So step 1 in our game plan is to formulate a strategic response to the question, "How are you?" Okay? You know that you're going to get the question, so it's time to prepare for that one. It's 1 sentence, it resonates with the audience, and it opens the door to actually having a conversation. Step 2 in our game plan is to add ETA to every conversation. Now, ETA would usually stand for estimated time of arrival or expected time of arrival, which is why I'm sitting with Nelson Cruz in his car, driving his very nice car a couple of years ago. So you've got that visual every time you get in the car now, and you think about your ETA. Here's what I want it to mean for you: expectation, timeline, and action item. I developed this strategy out of necessity, being in a locker room, because there is a big difference between asking, "Do you have time for an interview today?" and "Do you have time to answer 2 questions about the home run derby before batting practice? I can come and find you on the field." One approach led to a lot of yeses, but no actual results. The other approach leads to results 100% of the time. It works because what we're doing is making things very clear for the person that we are talking to. We are setting the expectation, which is misspelled. We are setting the expectation for that conversation. What are we going to be talking about? How long is that going to last? Who should be initiating that meeting, that conversation, that follow-up strategy, right? Don't withhold the information because you think they don't need to know that until we get into the meeting, right? This creates a lot of stress and it creates a lot of confusion. And if we think about being in transition or being in a hybrid work model, this is what's going to keep you mostly sane, but on the same page. Because call me when you get a second, or stop by my office when you get a minute. Even me reading those things makes my palms sweat, and nobody just said them to me. Am I the only one? Like, call me when you get a second. Did you automatically jump to the worst case scenario? Because you have no idea what's going to happen, right? It sounds a lot different if you would say this instead. "I'd like to make sure we debrief with Jeff and connect with the new president and board chair before mid-July. Could you call me to compare schedules before the end of the week?" Now I know what we're getting into. If you just say, "Call me when you get a chance," I am instantly stressed out, panicked, and trying to figure out what I did to make you angry. As leaders, when we think about the big picture and how people are receiving our information, think through what it feels like to be on that side of the conversation. What information would you like to know? What would help ease their mind? Now, I get it. Not every conversation is one that you want to have, but it certainly doesn't make it easier to spring it on them at the last minute. And the reason this response and this approach gets 100% response from my athletes is this. I have given them the option to say yes or no very quickly. If the answer is no, I don't have time to talk to you today, I would much rather find that out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I ask than finding that out at 5 p.m. when I'm on deadline and now I've got a black hole on TV that I have to figure out how to fill. The same thing is true if we are talking to clients or to colleagues or employees. If the answer is going to be no, then it's easier to figure that out earlier. Also, if the answer is no, I don't have time to talk before batting practice, but I'm happy to talk to you after, no problem. At least we have something to go on. When you put parameters around this, we give them the option to say yes or no, to provide an alternative. We have baked accountability into this exchange because if you don't show up to do this interview with me, or let's say you're talking to an employee and you say, can you have this email sent by 5 p.m. today? And they don't do it. Well, now you're just holding people accountable to something they've already agreed to. When it's not done by 5 o'clock, you can say, hey, you agreed to do it by 5 o'clock. What happened? How can I help you? Where's the challenge? But also calling to attention that you didn't execute the way that you said that you were going to. Here's a couple of examples of what this would look like, and then we'll move on to our third strategy. So if you are adding ETA, expectation, timeline, and action item to conversations and meetings, instead of saying, we've got a lot to discuss today, which is true, but your audience, whether it's Rotarians or employees or at a networking event, needs a little bit more to stay engaged. They need to know what's in it for them up front. They are not going to be drawn in by the suspense, and they're not generally as interested in what you have to say as you are. I know this from personal experience. So we're going to switch this around a little bit and say we're going to cover 3 big topics today, including the new training module that's available, survey feedback, and extending the deadline for updating the website. It's going to take 30 minutes. Then I'd like to get feedback on you for the images that we're considering. I know that that's a longer communication with them, but it answers so many questions so that they know what they're listening for and what their expected response is going to be. Same thing if you were to say, let's sidebar after this meeting. Well, that's fine, but I don't know who's starting it and if it's really starting right after the meeting. Our option 2, when we add ETA, clears all of that up. Susan and Brian, let's chat on Teams for about 15 minutes after the meeting to finalize the timeline. Susan, will you please initiate that chat as soon as we log off the meeting? Okay, so that is strategy number 2. The final strategy in our game plan that we need to go over is this: asking focused questions. Now, as Beth mentioned, I created an on-demand video series to tackle this topic. So if you're interested, you can purchase it on the website. Also, if you're just intrigued as to how many ways conventional wisdom gets it wrong when they tell us what a good question is or isn't, it's a pretty interesting topic. What do you notice? And I'm just going to give you just a second here. And I'm going to look back at the chat. So I'm going to open the chat. What do you notice about those questions? What do you notice about the types of those questions? And go ahead and type in your response in the chat. Do you see any similarities with those 3 questions that are listed on the slides? Type of questions. And while I'm waiting for an answer there, Bill, I have always been mostly a fast talker and I'm currently drinking coffee. So there's that. You're getting the benefit of me being very excited and on coffee. Very specific. Burr and Jeff. I'm seeing this. Yep. Suzanne, you're right. But what I'm looking for is, yep, Beth, you've got it. Not open-ended, yes, no questions. That's exactly right. They are all yes, no answers. And this is the counterintuitive approach to making sure you get the answers and the information that you need. Conventional wisdom would tell you that open-ended questions are best because it gives people the most opportunity to respond to you. That is absolutely false. Here's what actually happens when you give an open-ended question. Now, if you were to ask me an open-ended question, as has already been pointed out, I talk fast and I talk a lot. You're probably going to get a lengthy answer. But when we make the question so big and so broad, we introduce a lot of confusion. And a confused mind always says no. And it might not sound like, no, I'm not answering that question. What a confused mind does will say, no, I'm not going to be honest with that question. I'm going to take the safe bet. And the safe choice is to say nothing of value at all, or to give you a one-word answer. It is exactly what happens when we ask, how are you? How are you is a very broad, open-ended question. And in the last year, I've heard a lot of people say, I use that question because I really want to know how you're doing mentally, physically, with your family. I get that. But unless you give me permission to talk about how I'm feeling mentally or physically or with my family, I'm not going to know that that's what you meant. And I'm just going to say it's fine or it's good. When we are looking for true engagement with our teams, with people that we need feedback from, the very best way to get it is by asking a yes/no question. These will get to the heart of the issue faster than anything else. Have you already talked about the October event? Answer is pretty simple, yes or no. And I want you to think about it in this context. If you have not been part of every single conversation that has taken place, or let's say you're not working in the office 5 days a week, you're working from home a couple of days a week, and you've got team members that are in 3 days a week, and you have no idea what happened in the organic conversation that popped up after everybody logged off the staff meeting. Instead of saying, what did I miss? Because they don't know what you missed. They weren't thinking about it that way. They just started having a conversation with coworkers and was having a great time and started problem solving and talking about the event in October. If what you need is information about that event, make it very, very obvious. Has the new product launch been discussed yet? Have you met with a new vendor yet? Have you talked about the October project? That's going to get you something that you can take action on. And now as a leader, we are spending less time going back and forth in emails or making people guess what it is that we're thinking. Now, I'm going to wrap up here in just a second, and I'll make sure that there's some time for questions here. But as you're seeing, it takes intentionality. Oh, Jennifer pops this one in. Can yes, no questions mimic cross-examining and make people uncomfortable? Your answer is yes and no. So Jennifer, here's what I would say. You can make any question uncomfortable and you can make any question comfortable. Part of it is the look on your face, the tone in your voice, and your delivery. If I walked up to you and we were just chatting, I said, oh my gosh, have you already talked about that October event? Oh, and I meant to talk to you. Have you met with a new vendor yet? That doesn't sound like cross-examination, right? Now, if you're just going to read all the bullet points and you're going to fire them at me, then yeah, it's going to feel uncomfortable. But same thing happens when we're searching around for what to say. It can be equally as uncomfortable to ask open-ended questions. Where do you go to school? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite hike? Where do you like to travel? Right? We can make either sound comfortable or uncomfortable. Part of this comes down to practicing. Knowing what your real objective is. Practicing saying the words. And it really ties in so nicely to what Father Sundberg said again, in saying time is the most valuable thing we can give people. And when we think about an intentional game plan and intentional conversations, it will take a little bit more time before we jump into them so that we can be strategic. Thoughtfulness and the time it takes to be thoughtful is a leadership skill. It comes through in the way you present information, the way you set people up to succeed, and the way you take advantage of these little moments during the course of the day. Now, I will be the first to admit that I have not always been as strategic or as intentional with the conversations that I have now. I kind of have to do that out of necessity when you figure out what works and what doesn't work in a locker room. And sometimes it's an entirely different set of circumstances. Some of you might remember when the Mariners would host FanFest in January, and Root Sports would put our sports desk at home plate. And Brad and Angie and I would take turns interviewing fans. Those interviews were about 90 seconds long, and they got burned onto DVDs, and then the families would take them home. And that was kind of like the take-home giveaway from FanFest. That line stretched all the way up from the field to the concourse. It was a huge line. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to ask normal questions that I would ask fans, and this is going to be great, and it's going to be so easy. And then the first 4-year-old sat down in the chair next to me and proceeded to not answer any questions or to give me one-word answers. And any of you who have been around children or have 5 and 4-year-olds know that conversations can be pretty abrupt. So I had to change tacts. And I realized that for as much as the parents said, oh, no, little Johnny, little Susie, they really want to sit with you, it was more about the parent having that memory on DVD. So instead of making it about the kids, I pictured what would happen if these interviews were used at their graduation or their wedding rehearsals. And what would the parents want to see their little boy or girl do on camera? I was in service to the parents, not to the children. I haven't thought about that in a really long time until it came up at the end of an interview that I did a couple of weeks ago. I was wrapping up the interview and I was talking to this gentleman named Phil, and he said, before we go, I just need to tell you thank you. Years ago, you interviewed my daughter, and we were at FanFest, and it was my birthday. And you asked her all these questions, and we have this on video, and I just want to tell you that we still have that video and we watch it quite a bit. Now, the kicker to this story is Phil is battling ALS. He will ultimately lose his battle to Lou Gehrig's disease. He can no longer do those things with his daughter, but he watches the video and shares the memories from years ago. That was not my intent. I was picturing the happy occasions that a family would remember. But it also goes to show that you don't know how your words are going to land or when they're going to land and when they're going to be part of something that makes somebody's day. Your words are powerful. Following a game plan that allows you to be more intentional and strategic allows you to be a thoughtful leader and one that others want to follow and be like. Thank you for allowing me to share today.
Thank you, Jen. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to ask any questions because I'm going to leave it right there on that story. That is really a magnificent story, and you are magnificent. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention today. I'm glad we could squeeze you into Jeff's presidency. Thank you.